I started using dating apps in late spring of last year, and I matched with someone on Tinder. Her name was Doreen, and her profile was simple. She had 3 pictures, one of her at a coffee shop, one of her standing on a hiking trail, and one with a dog that she said belonged to her sister. We talked for about a week before meeting, which seemed like a pretty long time. She seemed normal enough in person, and our conversations were easy. She worked in marketing for a startup company, and said she was tired of wasting time with people who weren't serious. I thought that was understandable, but what do you expect on Tinder? Our first date was at a bar downtown. She ordered a gin and tonic and asked me more questions than normal. It felt a bit like an interview, but not in a bad way. Some of that was probably my nerves, and I might not have been carrying my end of the conversation. She wanted to know about my job, my family, and what I thought about living in the city. She wasn't overly flirty, but she paid attention when I spoke. We went out again the following week, this time for dinner. By the 3rd time, it felt comfortable, like we'd known each other longer than we had. One night after dinner, she suggested I come over. She said she lived in a newer development outside the city. I agreed to go, and as I drove in, I saw what she meant. The neighborhood was half-built. Some houses had lights on, but most were empty shells with unfinished siding and piles of wood in the yards. There were construction trucks parked along the streets, though no workers were around since it was evening. Her place was near the back of the development. From the outside, it looked finished, with a driveway, a small patch of grass, and blinds on the windows. Inside, though, it was strange. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a rug, but no personal touches. The kitchen counters were spotless, with nothing on them. The fridge hummed, but when I opened it to grab water, it held only a 6-pack of soda and a carton of eggs. No condiments, no leftovers, nothing that suggested someone actually lived there. I asked how long she'd been in the house. "Oh, a while," she said. She didn't explain further, and I laughed awkwardly, waiting for her to say more, but that never happened. I sat down on the couch while she disappeared into the hallway. I looked around again, noticing the details I'd missed at first. The bookshelves were empty, and the walls had generic-looking artwork, the kind you'd see in a furniture store display. Even the throw pillows looked like they'd been placed by someone staging a home for a showing. That was when I started to feel something was off. I stood up and called toward the hallway, saying I should probably head out soon. She came back right as soon as the words left my mouth, still smiling. That was when I heard something from outside near the garage. I walked toward the front door, but before I reached it, I noticed 2 men stepping out from the unfinished garage. They wore dark clothes and masks that covered their faces, and remember that this was well after it was normal to wear masks. They stopped when they saw me, and for a moment, none of us moved. Then one of them started walking quickly towards me. I turned and went through the back sliding door. It led to a small patio with no furniture. Beyond it was a patch of grass that ended at a row of half-built houses. I ran towards them without looking back, and as I did, my shoes sank into the soft dirt where the road hadn't been paved yet. Then I ducked behind a stack of lumber and tried to stay quiet. I heard voices that sounded like 2 men talking to each other, then another voice that sounded like Doreen's. I crouched there for several minutes, trying to calm myself enough to think. My car was parked out front, maybe 5 houses away, but I had no clear path back without being seen. I looked around and spotted a narrow gap between 2 houses under construction. I slipped through it and ended up in another backyard. From there, I made my way carefully towards the street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, because most of the houses didn't have occupants yet, and the few that did were dark since it was late. I reached the end of the yard, then looked out, and I didn't see anyone. I sprinted across the gravel and made it to the next row of houses. My car was 2 doors over. I could still hear them calling to each other, and they weren't far. I stayed low and cut across another lot, trying not to trip over debris. When I finally saw my car, I forced myself to walk instead of run because I didn't want to draw attention at the last second. I unlocked it, got inside, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked back once and saw 2 figures standing in the street near the house. They didn't try to chase me, they just watched as I drove off, but I didn't see Doreen. That night, I called the police. They asked for the address and said they'd send a patrol to check it out. I waited for a call back, but when it came, they told me the house was empty and there were no signs of anyone staying there. The garage was also empty, except for some tools and building materials. They asked if I might have the wrong street, but I'd saved the address earlier when she texted it to me, and I knew it was right. The police suggested it could have been trespassers using the house without the builder's permission. He said it wasn't uncommon in half-built developments. For a few days, I kept checking the app, but her profile was gone. My messages with her disappeared too, so it seemed like she'd unmatched me. I searched online for her photos, but didn't find anything. It was like she'd never even existed. I drove back to that neighborhood one time, a week later. The house was locked up and the blinds were drawn. In the end, I never learned who she really was or what those men had planned. Months later, I read a short article online about a burglary ring that had been operating in unfinished neighborhoods. They'd use houses as meeting spots and lure people in with fake ads or offers. The details weren't exact, but it was close enough to make me wonder if that was what I'd stumbled into. I worked with a woman named Karen up until a few years ago. She was in her early 30s, lived alone, and had a really friendly personality that made her easy to talk to. She wasn't the type to share a lot of personal details at work, but we got along well enough that we did discuss our personal lives sometimes. One day, she told me that she'd started using Tinder. She wasn't desperate about it or anything, just curious and open to meeting new people. She said she'd gone on a few dates already, and there was one guy she seemed interested in. His name was Sean. From what she described, Sean sounded cool. He worked in customer service and lived in the next town over. She said he was polite and actually listened when she talked, which she found refreshing compared to some of the other people she'd met. They went out 3 or 4 times, usually casual dinners or drinks. I remember thinking it sounded like things were going fine, but then one Friday night, she invited him over to her apartment for the first time. She had a 2-bedroom place in a mid-rise building, about 10 minutes from work. I'd been there once, and it was basic but clean, and decorated with the kind of cozy touches you could tell she cared about. She had framed photos on the wall, a few shelves of books, and a big couch that she always said was the best part of the apartment. She bought some wine and snacks, and Sean came over at around 8. Karen told me later that the night started out good. They had wine, watched a movie, and talked for a while. She said he asked her a lot of questions about her family and her childhood, but at the time it didn't seem strange. People usually want to know more when they're getting closer, so she didn't think much of it. Eventually, they both got tired and dozed off together on the couch. At around 3 in the morning, Karen woke up. She noticed right away that Sean wasn't next to her anymore. At first she thought he'd just gone to the bathroom, or maybe went into the kitchen for water. But when she sat up and looked around, she didn't see him. The only light was a faint glow from the street lamp outside, slipping through the blinds. She stood up, a little groggy, and walked into the living room. That's when she saw him. Sean was sitting in a chair across the room. The lights were off, but she could see his face clearly enough in the dim light. On his lap was one of her old photo albums. It was one her mom made when she was a kid, and it was filled with school pictures, birthday parties, and family trips. Next to him on the table was a pile of her unopened mail. He must have pulled it out of the small drawer by the TV where she kept it. He looked completely calm, like this was a normal thing to be doing at 3 in the morning. Karen said she froze for a moment, and she was trying to understand what she was looking at. She asked him what he was doing, and he looked up at her with a strange smile. Then he said, "Just learning about you." His tone was calm, almost casual, like he didn't see anything wrong with it. That's when she realized how creepy the situation really was, and she asked him to leave. Sean didn't argue or get angry. He just said no in the same calm tone, like it wasn't even up for discussion. Karen felt unsettled enough that she decided not to press him. She slowly backed into the hallway, keeping her eyes on him, and slipped into the bathroom. She locked the door right away, sat on the floor, and grabbed her phone. She called 911 and explained the situation as best she could, even though it sounded insane. She stayed locked in there for nearly 20 minutes, and she said that those were some of the longest minutes of her life. She tried listening through the door to figure out what he was doing, but all she heard was silence. At one point she thought she heard him moving around, but when she pressed her ear closer to the door, it went quiet again. She didn't know if he was still in the living room or standing just outside. When the police finally knocked, she waited until she was absolutely sure before she opened the bathroom door. She ran over to the front door and swung it open. Sean was still in the living room, sitting in the same chair with the photo album on his lap. He was smiling when they walked in, as if he'd been waiting for them. One of the cops guided Karen out into the hall while the other spoke to Sean. She said Sean never resisted or raised his voice. He just kept sitting there with that same look on his face, calm and almost amused. They searched his backpack, which he'd left by the front door. Inside, they found a pair of gloves, a roll of duct tape, and several zip ties. Karen told me when she saw what they pulled out of the bag, she felt sick. Up until that point, she'd been telling herself that maybe he was just odd or socially awkward. But seeing those things made her realize there was no innocent explanation. The police cuffed him and walked him out of the apartment, while one officer stayed with her. He asked her if she invited him over willingly, and if she wanted to press charges. She answered yes to both. After the police left, she stayed on the phone with her sister until morning. She said the image of him sitting in the dark, flipping through pictures of her as a little girl, kept replaying in her head. At work, she told me and a few others the whole story, partly because she needed to talk about it, and partly because she wanted to warn people. She deleted Tinder and said she wouldn't be using dating apps again anytime soon. The last time we talked about it, she said she was glad she'd woken up when she did. Then she said something that stuck with me. You think you know someone after a few dinners, but sometimes you don't know anything at all. I was a sophomore in college when this happened. I was 20 years old and living in a cramped off-campus apartment with two other guys who spent more time gaming than going to class. I wasn't much different, but I liked to get out once in a while. I'd been using Tinder since my freshman year, but most of my matches led nowhere. Sometimes there was a quick conversation and then silence. Other times we'd set something up and it would fizzle before it happened, and this one started out like any other. Her name was Leslie, and her profile only had a few pictures. They were all selfies, which seems pretty common, so not much stood out. At the time, I was mostly swiping right on everyone, so there wasn't that much that set her apart at first. She had brown hair, shoulder length, and a wide smile. She didn't list much in her bio, just country girl, looking for something real. That was about it, nothing unusual. She messaged me first, which was rare, and she asked if I went to university, since she recognized the logo in one of my photos. I told her I did, and she said she lived just outside town, about an hour away. I asked for her Snapchat, but she said she didn't use it much and preferred texting. That seemed a little odd, but not completely out of the ordinary, so I gave her my number. We texted on and off for about a week. She told me she worked part-time at a grocery store, and when she wasn't working, she helped her dad on their property. She said it was a lot of land, mostly fields and woods. She didn't complain about it, but she made it clear she wanted someone who was okay with a quieter lifestyle. I told her I grew up in the suburbs and didn't mind the idea of open space, and she seemed happy with that. One night, she asked if I wanted to come see her. It was a Friday, and my roommates were making plans to go out, but I wasn't really in the mood for bars. I figured it could be interesting to meet someone new. I asked for her address, and she said her place didn't show up right on GPS, but she could send me directions. She sent them as a series of short texts. First, I had to take the highway north out of town, then get off at an exit near a small town I'd never been to. From there, I was supposed to follow a county road until I saw a gas station, then take a left. She kept going, step by step, until it sounded like I'd be out in the middle of nowhere. I asked her if she was sure that was the easiest way, and she said it was, and she promised it wasn't as confusing as it seemed. I told her I'd leave in about 30 minutes, and she said she'd be waiting. The first half of the drive was normal. I took the highway out of town, stopped for gas, and texted her that I was on my way. By the time I got off the exit, the area started to look unfamiliar. The small town she mentioned was more like a cluster of buildings. There was a diner, a post office, and one of those combination gas station and general stores. The roads got narrower, and there weren't many streetlights. I followed her directions carefully, because I knew if I got lost, it would be hard to get back on track. She texted me every 10 minutes or so, reminding me to keep going and that I was close. At one point, I passed a row of old houses, most of them looking run down with broken fences and overgrown yards. Then the paved road ended and turned into packed dirt. I slowed down because the gravel kicked up against my car. It was strange driving out there, and I didn't pass any other cars. I glanced at my phone every so often, waiting for her next message, but my service bars were dropping. Eventually, I lost them altogether. I could still read her old texts, but I couldn't send anything new. The dirt road kept going until I finally came to an open clearing. There were no houses or barns, just a wide empty field. At the far end of it, maybe 50 yards away, there was a pickup truck parked with its lights off. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd gone the wrong way. I pulled out my phone and tried to text her that I'd arrived, even though I didn't have service. The message just sat there unsent. As I was looking at my phone, the truck's headlights came on. For a second, I thought maybe it was her waiting for me. Then the engine revved, and the truck started moving towards me fast. I threw my car into reverse, nearly stalling because I was so shaky with the gear shift. The truck kept coming straight at me. I managed to turn enough to spin around, and I floored it back onto the dirt road. My tires skidded and kicked up clouds of dust, but the car caught traction and shot forward. In my rearview mirror, the truck's headlights grew smaller, but I could still see them bouncing along the road. Whoever it was following me. The chase went on for what felt like forever. I had no service and no idea how far back the paved road was. All I could think about was staying on the road and not losing control. Eventually, the truck stopped following. I didn't notice right away because I was too focused on the road, but when I checked the mirror again, the headlights were gone. I didn't slow down though. I kept driving until I finally got back to that small town. Even then, I didn't want to stop, but I had to calm down. The gas station was open, so I pulled into the parking lot to relax. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed because it picked up service again. I looked down at my messages, and the only new one was from right before the truck came at me, and when I opened Tinder, her profile wasn't there anymore. I just sat there for a while, trying to make sense of it. I replayed the night in my head, wondering if I'd missed something obvious. When I finally got myself together, I drove back to my apartment. My roommates were still up, and they were playing a game in the living room. They asked where I'd been, and I told them everything. The next day, I called the sheriff's office in the county where it happened. I told them I'd been lured down a dirt road by someone pretending to meet up with me. The deputy I spoke to didn't sound surprised. He said they'd had a few similar reports over the years, but never caught anyone. For the next few weeks, I kept checking Tinder, half expecting her profile to pop up again under a different name, but it never did. Sometimes I still think about what would have happened if I'd pulled into that field instead of stopping where I did. I wonder if the truck would have trapped me in, or if someone else had been waiting. I'll never know, and honestly I don't want to.